Hello, everyone. My guest today is Dale Durrett. Dale's the VP of Data and Partnership at Bombora. Welcome to the show, Dale.
Thanks so much. Good to see you.
Same here, Dale. As I mentioned before, this is an exciting episode of Hellbent on Intent for two reasons. A, given the fact we are creating content or video series about intent, it's great to have the company that sort of created this B2B intent category. So I'm glad. And B, in the market, we do compete. So we sell to customers, and you guys do a fantastic job. You guys win some, we win some. But we always take the stance as, there's different kinds of intent data, and you guys do it in a fundamentally different way, in an ethical way. And so it's great to have you, so that for the audience, that you're not the enemy. It's all about competition and just educating the market. So welcome to the show, Dale.
Thank you so much. Good to be here. And yes, I think we do compete, but to your point, I think as the intent landscape evolves, I think folks are starting to realize that there are different kinds of intent signals. And, I think the folks that are the most forward thinking, I'll mention, companies like SAP and that I think have really taken intent and that kind of strategy to the next level with programs like Crystal Ball,
Yep.
Where they bring in multiple intent signals to ultimately, drive their marketing and sales tactics, which I think is kind of where we're headed. So
Sure.
yes, I think sometimes from an intent standpoint, if you have the capabilities and the know-how to combine those signals, it can be very powerful.
And the resources too, I guess.
Of course, yes.
For sure.
Yeah.
So let's start at the beginning here, Dale. I'm curious because you guys had background in publishing, in like Bombora's original story and demand gen.
Right.
How did this idea come about? Like, what's the origin story here?
Yeah, I think when you think about, lead generation, it's very much around trying to be the most effective you can. And I think for the longest time, what that meant was volume of leads,
Yes.
right? And I think to a certain point, sometimes maybe today that still exists. But
Exactly. I was going to say.
Yeah, but the whole concept, I think, around, Bombora company surge and the, this intent category that, to your point, we somewhat started was really about taking that volume kind of equation and having it more around quality, so that, right from the top of the funnel, the leads that were generated through the marketing efforts that were ultimately passed to sales not only fit a firmographic and a demographic profile, but there was some level of intent associated to that individual in terms of the products or service that company was looking to sell. And I think that whole concept of how do we use data to further enhance the way that we generate leads was really kind of the birth of Bombora surge. And that came out of, obviously the Madison Logic prowess in terms of lead generation. And then I think also just the evolution of the volume of data and the ability to parse that data in ways that are meaningful.
Yeah.
So kind of timing as well in terms of, where the market and cloud computing and all of that kind of stuff was. Yeah.
One thing I find fascinating, you talk about data, right? Like you use data to infer better lead generation or enrich the lead generation so that you're looking at more quality over quantity. But for the data piece, that's also fascinating. You guys came up with this idea of a data co-op. You
Right.
do not necessarily own any publishers.
No.
You might now, but the approach you took was, let's go to the publishers and how did that idea come about?
Yeah, and I think that the whole idea there was, I think when you think about intent, there's kind of two kinds of signals, right?
Oh.
There's a first party signal, and then there's a third party signal.
True.
And you can get those signals in different places. And so I think the idea behind Bombora was to aggregate at scale for B2B intent third party signals, because most companies have the ability to derive some intent from first-party data, giving marketing automation, CRM,
For sure.
CDPs, whatever it might be,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what was kind of missing was looking in your own backyard is one thing. Okay, we know these customers, we know they're coming to our site, so there's some interest in our products and services. Further understanding that customer, enriching your profile on them is very important.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's kind of limiting.
Yes.
So by bringing third-party intent, which was gathered across this B2B co-op of publishers, what we were able to do was to combine that very valuable first-party set of data that customers sit on, and combine that with a third-party signal. So then what you have is, I have a company or a contact that's not only interested in my brand and my products and services, given the content consumption I'm seeing on the third-party web, but they're also coming to my website. So there I have brand preference. So I have both brand preference as well as a strong signal that that company and that contact is in market for my products and services. So the combination of that first and third party data is really, I think, where the magic happens in terms of intent. And the co-op was established to try to aggregate that third party B2B intent signal at scale through looking at how domains consume content and classifying that consumption into a B2B topic taxonomy, which then allows us to monitor that consumption of content across those domains, establish a baseline, and be able to then understand the norm by individual domain associated content consumption across topics or a group of those topics to derive whether they are consuming more or less of that content than they do normally. And then the way that you parse and group that data allows you to activate very many different use cases.
Yeah. And we are going to go to that, the scoring piece and the taxonomy. Few content co-op related questions for you, Dale, is what's in it for a publisher to license this data to you? It's their first party.
Yeah, so it's a great question. So the way we actually, talk about it's a value exchange. And the way that it works is that, the way I first came into contact with Bombora is I worked for CBS Interactive at the time, and they're now part of Red Venture. But we ran a pretty big lead generation business there, and we were looking to basically do a couple of things. But at the end of the day, we wanted to better understand both existing subscribers and anonymous users coming to the site so that we could further enhance our subscription efforts, as well as our ad targeting efforts, as well as our lead generation efforts. So basically, we went through the process of setting up kind of an ad tech, martech stack. And through that process, we realized that to really take advantage of it, we needed additional data sets. So we worked with Bombora. We were one of the first really large publishers to actually join the co-op. And so the value exchange there really is the ability to enrich existing customer information on those subscribers and those folks that have given you first party data. And then the ability, the real big differentiator for Bombora and why publishers see the value is the ability for us to enrich anonymous users on their first view to the page, given what we're able to do. So that for us was huge because it allowed us to start to really have engaging outreach to net new users, which increased our overall subscriber base and enriched our targeting and lead generation products.
And by anonymous, you're revealing which companies are they coming from and things like that. That is of massive value.
For example, yes. So any device visiting the page, we can return information like domain, and then additional firmographic and demographic data points depending on the resolution we see on that particular page. But yeah,
amazing. Now, when you're thinking from a content co-op perspective, Dale, do you see how many publishers do you have? Is it like 4,000 or something? I read a stat.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's over. So the way to think about it is obviously the publishing houses like the Dow Joneses, but then there's individual publications within those, right? That well, given where you sit today. So
yes.
So it's more like that. So I believe there's around 4,000 actual publishing companies, and then I'm not sure at this point what the actual number of publishers in, but it's very large, and it's global.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
amazing. And do you see a long tail in intent signals that is coming from these publishers? Like, do you see, 80% of the signals come from 20% of these publishers, and the others are more long tail? Is there a
Yeah,
distribution there?
there is. I mean, obviously, just in terms of volume, but then when you look at the signal, then you get value from even though it's diminishing sometimes. For example, like when somebody goes to HRMS, right? Somebody is going to an HR dedicated site. The signal there is really, really important in terms of job function. But it might not be at scale, right? Whereas, so both the head of it kind of varies. So yes, we do see different volumes, but we get value from kind of the more broad as well as the more narrow signals.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. Now let's talk about this thing that I have a funny thought around this, the idea of surge. You mentioned offline before to me that you're not allowed to use the term surging or something.
No, surge we've trademarked.
Okay.
So we've put quite a bit of effort into, trademarking the word surge. And so we try to stay away from the natural extension of surge, which is surging.
Yes.
Because that is not trademarked. And so we try to invest in kind of where we've made that investment in terms of the way we talk about Bombora company surge or surge itself. So a company is in a surge; it's not necessarily surging.
And here's the thing: I'll tell you this, which I find it fascinating, is whether it's but you guys did it on purpose or accidentally happens. When someone says this term, it's like, I want to know companies that are surging on my topics. It is very easily confused with searching,
right?
And they're like, oh, they searched these competitive names on Google. That's why it's telling me. And do you ever see that? It's a good benefit for you guys, but do you ever see that?
I haven't thought of that, but I do get the folks coming back and saying, oh, so the way that you get or derive your intent is through search.
Yeah.
So maybe there's, I don't think it's a bridge too far.
What do you say to that, Dale?
Well, we don't. We derive intent purely through content consumption,
right.
And through the co-op. So it's really about, and it's very much at the domain level. Which is also a differentiator for us. A lot of our competitors in the space are deriving intent at the contact level. We don't do that. We derive intent at the domain level. Which is different. So
yep, and we're going to touch on that. So let's talk about, if someone had to describe, Dale, what's a surge score? What would that mean?
Well, you see, it depends on who you're talking to and the sophistication of the audience, to be honest. Because if it's the initial discovery call, you're talking about a composite score. So you're talking about a very kind of a high level score at the company level. Right. Just to explain the concept.
Yes.
But obviously, there are different use cases as you move through the marketing funnel. And so what we're very focused on is activating our data, our intent data across that funnel, whether it's top of funnel activity, programmatic display, social, connected TV, addressable TV, digital out of home, whatever the channel might be, right? That top of funnel is, we really try to activate our data as much as we can do there, as well as in marketing automation, as well as in sales enablement. And so in order to do that, you need to be able to pull different dials. And so, the average consumer would think about Bombora company search as having one score, which is the average composite score of that account. But when we get into further down in the sales cycle, or into marketing automation or sales enablement use cases, we have different scores, both at the account level as well as at the regional level, or the geographic level, that allow you to further refine the data set that is returned, depending on the use case. So for example, if it's a top of funnel, it's probably pretty broad. We're probably using the average composite score to do that. But as we go down, we'll dial in different scores. And then there's other nuances as well, like, additional topics within a cluster increasing in activity versus decreasing week over week. So there's all these scores that are standard, as well as other signals that you can use to refine the data set in order to get the best results in whatever use case you're activating for. So it gets fairly complex if you really want to take advantage of it, especially the further you get down the funnel, because you've got to be able to dial in the scores and the signals in order to really deliver a quality, data set to act off, especially if you've got people calling on it or, whatever it might be. Yeah.
What goes in what are some high level factors that goes into a company or like a domain scoring high on search versus low versus what are the?
Yeah, absolutely. So, basically at a high level, it's a domain consuming topics over time. And what we're able to do then is to establish the domain, its consumption of that topic as a norm. And then if that domain consumes more content or topic than it does normally, that's what drives that increase in the search score. So the composite search score at the account level, the very high level score, is basically 0 to 100. 0 to 60 is average amount of activity against that topic or topic cluster. And then anything above 60 towards 100 is above normal. And the higher it is above 60, in theory, the more people at that company are researching that particular topic or topic cluster. And that topic and topic cluster relates to the product or service that that company is looking to sell.
Understood.
So therefore, that's how we build the bridge between the topics in the topic cluster and the account score. We basically create the topic cluster based on topics that represent the product or service that the customer is going to market with. Therefore, when we score the domains that are part of their TAM, we're scoring those domains based on the content consumption of the topics within the cluster that relates to the product or service they're going to market with.
How many topics are typically in a topic cluster? Is there a set number or?
It's a great question. So, for example, not all topics are created equal, right? So there's things like the big kind of difference, which is a good example here, is an entity, an actual Bombora, right? Or IDG, that for a sales team. If someone's, someone is showing intent on Bombora, it's probably a pretty good signal, right? Whereas, somebody that's looking to find companies that are showing intent on cloud, well, is it a hybrid solution? Is it a, what kind of, there's a lot of nuance there. So that's where a topic cluster would come into play. And so you can build a topic cluster with anywhere from 6 to, however many you want. But I think at the limit, you want at least 6, because you don't want to have, you want that topic cluster to be representative of the product or the service that you're going to market with. So you want to kind of remove any inconsistencies. Yeah.
On average, Dale, and this is a question that we have seen some customers ask. So they come to you and say, "Hey, this is my target account list, 1,000 accounts, for example, and I'm selling data warehousing software." On average, if you had to say from a search score perspective of above average of 60 and plus, what percentage of accounts, given a broad IT category, at any given time shows intent? It cannot be 100%. Just because they're in the target account list doesn't mean. Do you have any sense?
A third.
A third.
Yeah.
Of varying degree, though.
Right. Exactly. Right. So within that 60 to 100. So, and that's where I'm saying the sophistication comes in terms of actually parsing the data associated to those accounts that are in the 60 to 100. Just because they're in market or showing intent, you can still, further refine that to prioritize how you actually reach out to those customers to be the most effective.
How would you refine them? Like, what would be the ways to refine them further?
Well, I think in terms of just the way you reach them from an effective standpoint, right, and just the resources, right? So somebody that's, that is, at 90 to 100 across, 25 of the 50 topics that are in your segment and have been showing that intent over, a 2 to 3 week period, and is also showing up on your website. Those kinds of things you want to send to the black belts, right? Because I mean, that's fairly predictive that particular account and individual is in market for your product and service. So, you send that to a salesperson, whereas somebody that's, at 60 to 70 and might be, showing intent on, 10 of the topics within the cluster, maybe that goes to an SDR, or goes into a marketing automation campaign. So, we have integrations built into marketing automation and sales enablement tools. So, you can parse the data and then push it into those different channels for activation to make sure that you're being kind of the most effective in terms of reaching that customer, one, based on where they are in the cycle and how much intent they're showing, but also in terms of just efficiency and resources from an internal standpoint.
And do you see, Dale, customers when they're setting up these workflows or orchestration or activation, whatever you call them, it's they're deciding which workflow to send them, whether it's targeted ads or give it to SDRs or passing it to AEs or CS team, based on the score and the number of topics they're showing intent? Like those are some factors that they would use.
I wish that there was more synergy between the different departments. We tend to work a little bit in silos with customers. They'll either be leveraging our audience solutions or they'll be leveraging, the direct license. There are customers that are more on our kind of enterprise strategic side of things that leverage the data and pass that across. It also depends on company size. We tend to find the smaller and medium-sized businesses, there's a little bit more communication across lines there than there is in the big enterprises. But yeah, well, I mean, that is the holy grail, is to actually get, folks to be using our data across the funnel. For all the purpose we've talked about, but the other thing to just point out is the standardized data set throughout that allows for a lot clearer kind of ROI measurement. Because you're activating off the same data set across, your top to your mid to your lower funnel, and you can derive a lot of insights off that. And that's a key area that we're looking to kind of add value to our customers at the moment, is actually not only, to kind of visualize some of that for them, because it is a valuable set of data.
Yeah, and you mentioned something very interesting is that misalignment between sales and marketing. A lot of the times, I'm guessing a lot of your customers are marketers that buy this, and so they're looking at top of funnel, but there is still a challenge of them activating throughout the funnel, like giving it to SDRs, giving it to AEs, right?
We have two different sales teams. We have, because there's a buying committee, obviously, associated to the license data, which is very different to the buying committee associated to the audience activation. We work a lot directly with agencies on the audience activation and, the demand side platforms, the SSPs, whereas the Surge licenses sold direct into customers, there's a pretty complex buying committee going on there. So what ends up happening is kind of a land and expand strategy. We'll either land with audience solutions, show value there, and expand into direct license. Those sales teams work fairly collaboratively together, sharing pipeline and that kind of stuff. Or we land with direct through a sales enablement engagement, show value there, and then we move up the organization.
Understood. Understood. Yeah. So that's smart. When you talk about content consumption in Surge, Dale, do you weigh different kind of content consumption differently? So that's the question.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And we do, we look at like a couple of different things and weight it. We look at, number of topic events. We look at number of unique users. We look at topic relevancy weights. We look at content engagement. So there's a couple of different signals that go into weighting in order to derive that score. Yeah.
Understood. Yeah. So here's a question. Let me ask you. Talk about, someone, researching about a content. So what about this whole notion of false positives? So a classic example that someone mentioned to us prior, and we have heard this. If someone is researching on Snowflake's stellar performance on their last quarterly earnings, and they read an article on, I don't know, Yahoo News or Forbes or Bloomberg, whatever you guys have. And that is a entity that's I guess a competitor keyword. Would you pass that over to AWS and say, hey, they're showing interest on Snowflake, and normally they don't? How does that happen? Like,
well, first of all, I think the one thing I would just say is, how do you understand Snowflake, the company, versus Snowflake, the snow, right?
Yes.
So yeah, so
I didn't even think of that. True.
There's quite a bit of understanding that goes in there, and the way we do that is through a natural language processing engine, which topicizes the pages across the publisher co-op. So it's non-trivial to understand.
Absolutely.
Cloud versus cloud computing, and then the business context around that. So that's the first thing, is actually just being able, it's one thing, the use case, and I think a lot of folks talk about that as conquesting, and it is a use case that intent has become quite a lot of folks use it for conquesting and churn.
Yep.
However, you need to make sure that you actually first understand the context, especially with snowflakes and clouds and things like that. So once you've got that, yes, I definitely think there is the ability to do conquesting against, to understand if, for example, from a churn use case, right? If you have a large customer that hasn't engaged with your sales team, and you're able to run an understanding of what they might be doing out there, there's a very good possibility that if they are, showing intent on the product or service that they buy from you today, and they're not engaged, that there is a churn. So it can be used as a churn signal.
Yeah.
And I think a couple of other use cases as well. But yeah.
But let me ask you this. This is a question that we get asked, and I'm guessing you guys too. But from an isolated perspective, when you're using natural language processing and machine learning, where you're saying, hey, these guys are showing interest around Snowflake, the company. The immediate question that would come to someone's mind is, what's the accuracy of it? Because you're not telling me what piece of content they consumed, which IP or which website or anything like that. You are saying, so how do you
Yeah, good question. So first of all, we're at the domain, right?
Yes.
We're not showing intent at the contact level, which I think would be more complicated to explain at that level. But because we're at the domain, that we're looking at intent at the domain. The other key thing is that a lot of intent is interesting but not actionable. And what I mean by that is, if you don't have a baseline, over time, especially within B2B, because there's kind of three key things we know about B2B, right? One, there are large investments being made. So therefore, there's a pretty big buying committee across organization. And as a result of that, it takes at least 6 to 12 months to close a lot of deals, if not longer in certain cases. So if you're looking at intent without a historical baseline from a B2B standpoint, it can be interesting, but it's not necessarily actionable.
Right.
So it's important to be able to look at intent over a historical baseline. And we fundamentally believe at Bombora that you've got to start with intent at the domain. Because of that long buying cycle and the buying committee and the large investment being made, to understand that a contact is in market without understanding that the actual account or the company that he works for or she works for or they work for is in market, that is a misleading signal to send to your marketing or sales team. So those two signals work together as well. And I think that's, going to full circle to the beginning of our conversation. That's where I think the magic can happen. Like, between a Bombora and a more of a, like, overlaying that data into CRM, for example, at the contact level, so that that this contact who you call on every day and know well is at a company that is in market. So overlaying that data into the contact, or combining it with a provider that actually has contact level intent. But it's first understanding the domain being in market and then combining with the contacts that and then the next level would be obviously bringing those leads in, right? So identifying the accounts that are market, then understanding which of those accounts you have contacts at, and then as you're buying leads on a month or a week over week basis, making sure that those leads are flowing into that overall view of the account and the contacts and leads you have at that particular entity.
I 100% agree on that, the contact level piece. I question you on one thing. Why not look at account if possible, at both the levels. Obviously, at the level of a domain, just so you know, there's a bunch of activities from different people. But from certain people, if you can tag them, if you have the capability, saying, it's actually Pfizer who's researching about Snowflake and cloud computing and these topics at the domain, but it's actually few of the signals were consistently from Director of IT, Jenny Smith, so that you have that actionability when following up, rather than saying, go talk to Pfizer.
Absolutely. I agree. Those two things have to come together to make it, to make it really actionable. And we agree 100%. All we're saying is our speciality is at the
domain level.
And what we can do there is, depending on where the customer is engaging with their contacts and the leads, is overlay that data to give that signal. And then, to your point, bring in whatever intent signals you have at that contact or lead level to supplement the intent at the domain. Then I think if you've got a domain that's in market and a contact that's engaged, then you're golden.
Yeah, absolutely. But from an accuracy perspective, Dale, do you ever get that even at a domain level, saying, what's the accuracy of your intent, Dale? Like you told me these companies are showing surging, like let's say, basically, let me rephrase this. You're trying to sell to me, I'm the head of marketing at whatever, Snowflake, and you gave me 100 accounts that are showing intent at a high level that's over baseline. And I ask you, what's the accuracy of it? Meaning, these 100 accounts, how many of them are actually in market for a cloud warehouse software? How do you answer that question?
Yeah, I mean, it just goes back to the baseline, because we have a historical baseline, and it's 7 years now of data. So we feel pretty confident because we've established that baseline. And it's based on a stable set of data. That's the other thing, right? Not getting ahead of ourselves to Bidstream, but because we have the co-op, it gives us a very, very stable set of data coming in, which we can then normalize and look back historically. So, for example, one of the key use cases we do in a sales process is we ask a customer to give us close won opportunities. And we do what's called a historical look back, and we're able actually to decipher what they give us is close won opportunities and duds. And we end up telling them which of those are close won, which of them didn't. And the reason we're able to do that is by looking back at those accounts and seeing historically the activity against the surge topic clusters that represent that product or service. And through that surge activity, we're able to decipher of that group of closed won opportunities, which were real and which were not.
So that's how you're finding the accuracy. So you compare them and you say these ones, without knowing the label, you basically label them saying these are the ones showing intent. Hence, we think they were in market. These didn't show intent. They were not. And they would cross-reference that with their closed won.
Yes. And the key bridge there is, how do we do that? Yeah. We do that by creating this topic cluster that is relevant to the product or service of that particular brand. Yeah,
for sure. How often does it happen, Dale, that a customer comes to you and say, "Hey, I'm looking for this specific term"? It's like data science, I guess, is a category. But data science is too broad. I'm really interested in our programming language or something very specific. Yeah. How do you guys do with that?
It's tough. We have a taxonomy, I think, of over 10,000 topics at this point. And the one thing that's is good for us is we're solely focused in B2B.
Yes.
And at the moment, we cover a lot of verticals within B2B. But tech, telco, finance, those kinds of verticals we have, really deep coverage on. So it's difficult as well, because one word might mean the same thing, but it's very important to you because it's part of your go-to-market message. So you want to say X, you don't want to see Y, but in terms of intent, so it's tricky. And we do have the ability to add topics to our taxonomy, and customers can recommend that, but it does go through an approval process, and then, to create that baseline takes some time. So it's not an overnight thing.
Yeah, fair. Let's talk about, I guess, the elephant in the room, Bidstream. There was one person, a guest before, D from Metadata, and we asked them the questions like, and they resell Bombora data, they resell LeadSift data, a bunch of different data sources. And one of the questions I asked them is like, when you're pitching to a customer, how do you decide which intent vendor to choose. And he said, he gave a few different things, but one thing he said was, is like, look out from where they're getting the data from. If they don't have data from Europe, it's a very high chance they're not GDPR compliant. They're probably using Bitstream.
No.
I thought that was interesting. Is that what you guys noticed too? Like people that are selling Bitstream, they don't have coverage outside of US?
Yes, it's a good red flag. I mean, because
Okay.
the laws are a lot more developed,
Mm,
especially in EMEA under GDPR, and there's just a lot more case law there too. So in terms of the fines, they're a lot more real.
okay.
So I think folks are a lot more conservative of the use of the bitstream outside of um, outside of North America. I will say though that I think the bitstream is quite, it's quite a broad term. I think it's become something. It's kind of like back in the day, rich media, or something like that, where it kind
Yeah,
of encompasses a whole bunch of different
sure.
stuff. And I also think it's quite nuanced, because I think there are, legacy agreements in place, as well as net new agreements going in that provide people with different kinds of access, which on the surface might not seem kosher, but then depending on how that agreement is written and whatever, they do have access to that data. But because there's no precedent or no case law yet, it's interpreted in whichever way I suppose benefits you at this point, right?
Sure.
And until there's more case law around these kinds of things, especially in North America, I think it's very difficult to really discern what's, for lack of a better word, good or bad
Yeah.
usage of that bitstream. Yeah.
In From a broadest perspective, Dale, from what I understand, and maybe you can clarify this to me, from what I understand, Bitstream is, and why it makes it a little bit gray, is basically you're getting a seat at the table at one of these ad networks. You're bidding for a very, very low bid, and you get the digital exhaust data of IPs
Very
or
rich.
cookies, right? That
Yeah.
is that sort of the
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the key thing is, right, I mean, they've taken some of the data out of it, but I mean, it was really to drive bids and give as
yeah,
much information to those folks buying data to make
yeah.
the most sophisticated bid. And all of that's good. You can do, whatever you need to do there. I mean, I think the big concern though, and what's supposedly in the legal T's and C's, is that you are not able to create derivative works
Mm,
from that bid stream. So that's where it gets gray, right? Is if you're, through whatever means, legitimately being able to see that exhaust to make bids, or, making low bids in order to, get that data. The If you're not using that data solely to improve your bidding strategy, you're not supposedly creating derivative work. So therefore, if you're using that bid stream to derive some kind of intent, then in theory, you're in violation of the terms and conditions. But as I said, it's nuanced given the different kind of agreements and that are in place with
and
the
and these
SSPs and the DSPs.
And these SSPs, DSPs, does it include Google? Like, can you do it on Google Ad Network, or these are different to
No,
get?
it all kind of, I think that's the other nuance, is that there, especially Google, I think there's been over the last while a lot less transparency there than there had been in the past. So unfortunately, I think what it's leading to is kind of death by a thousand cuts, which is less and less transparency in the bid stream for those folks that are really trying to use it in the right way, which is to optimize their bids,
I
because of the what's going on. But it's still a very rich source of data.
I so someone, they pitched to us licensing intent data, and they said they were getting search intent data, literally. And I asked them, is it search? And there was no, it's search of US 300 million US people. Is it possible to bid through Google's ad network, saying if someone is searching for keyword X, and I want to show my ad in Google search, not display, and get that digital exhaust? Is that even possible?
It's a good question, Tukan. I'm not sure I'm the best person to talk to that particular point. And the thing is, as well as the Google ecosystem, given the expiring cookie, which
Mm,
is supposedly up 2023, is very much in flux. I think there has been, recent developments there in terms of a direction they're looking to go from a topic standpoint. And then there's been a lot of talk around, the publisher ID and how that's going to be leveraged along with the encrypted signal, along with UID2. So the Google ecosystem and how that's all going to work in the future is still in flux. But in terms of your question, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't
I'm
know
not sure how
either.
that works. Yeah.
It's crazy that someone can get that data, but obviously that's not legal because Google would not be happy for you to get that data that's
No,
coming to
and I
them.
think, unfortunately, I think, up until now, with the web is, we've been pretty self-governed, right? And unfortunately, I think we're getting to a point now where it's getting more complicated and there's more players, and so we now need to, have some overarching governing of what's going on. But at the same time, I do think that it's a small percentage of the folks that are abusing the system.
Yeah.
And I think it's also nuanced. Again, until there's actually case law, when we see how the laws play out, I think it's a really difficult conversation to have.
Agreed. No, this is great. Well, Dale, I know we've definitely gone over time, but I really want to thank you for the time. It was super informative for me. I'm pretty sure this will be the same for the audience.
Awesome.
I thank you. One question I do have to ask you before I let you go. The name of the show is Hell Bent on Intent. So I need to ask you, are you hell bent on intent?
I am hell bent on intent, but I do agree with you that I think it's not one flavor fits all. I think it's a combination of these different signals, and I also think it's about understanding and being able to parse the data for the different use cases in order to really take advantage of it. So I'll say that, but yes, I'm all in. I think it's a big part of how we're going to use data moving forward to engage audiences.
I could not agree more that yes, we are also hell-bent on intent, but the key part was really understanding what these signals mean. It is not a silver bullet. Just because you see this, don't put in, figure out what it really means, compare with baseline, compare with other signals, other kinds of signals, compare with your first party, and then come up with an action. I absolutely agree with that.
And I think we're both here to help. So folks, looking for insight, I think we'd be more than willing to help out. So yeah, it's fun.
Awesome.
I think it's a good space. Thanks for your time, Ken. I really appreciate it.
Thank
have
you.
a great day.
If you like this video, please drop us a like. Let us know what you think of it. And if you're hell-bent on intent, click on the link in description to stay updated when each new episode drops. See you there.